Welcome to the Well-Being Manifesto podcast, where we translate science and experience into realistic and sustainable ways of living. In each episode, we offer clear and practical strategies to support all aspects of well-being that matter to you, whether in your home, your community, or place of work. The Well-Being Manifesto is hosted by Dr. Moain Dabrh and Dr. David Freeman, who have spent their careers advancing whole person care. Join us as we focus on real lives and real change, with less hype, more truth, better living.
Welcome to the Well-Being Manifesto podcast, everyone. I am Moain Dabrh.
And I'm Dave Freeman. Today's guest is Dr. Dean Ornish, a physician, researcher, clinical professor, and founder of Preventive Medicine Research Institute. For over 4 decades, his pioneering work has shown that lifestyle, what we eat, how we move, how we manage stress, and how we connect can not only prevent, but also possibly reverse chronic conditions. Dr. Ornish, we're honored to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Dr. Ornish, first question. You've been both a scientist and a storyteller in the movement that to make lifestyle medicine mainstream. What early movements in your personal and professional life convinced you that this lifestyle approach, not just biology, is crucial to bring to healthcare?
Well, I guess if we go far enough back, it was when I was a freshman in college and I got suicidally depressed and found that these lifestyle interventions really helped bring me out of that. There's sometimes going through something can really be a doorway for real transformation. And I think that as physicians, sometimes we don't recognize that when someone is suffering, when they come to us with a lot of pain, that can be a catalyst for real transformation. We're trained to really not deal with it in that level, to literally or figuratively bypass the problem. And so later, when I was in medical school and I was on Michael DeBakey's surgical service, learning how to do bypass surgery, I remember, the first day of the rotation, he goes, "What year are you, son?" And I said, "I'm starting my 3rd year." He goes, "Well, damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here with all these weird ideas you have." He was very old school. He really basically invented the procedure, and he was the sort of guy who would like stick you with a needle and draw blood if you didn't move your hands fast enough out of the operating field, And so somehow I managed to survive that, but it also had a profound influence on me because we would operate on people, we'd bypass their clogged arteries, and he'd tell them they were cured. And more often than not, they would go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place, like eat junk food, not manage stress, not exercise, smoke cigarettes, be sedentary. And more often than not, the new bypasses would clog up. And so we'd cut them open again, sometimes multiple times. So for me, that became a metaphor that we're literally and figuratively bypassing the problem without also treating the underlying cause, which are really the lifestyle choices we make. So I went to these things that they had back then called libraries and these square things called journals, and and you could Xerox them for like a nickel a page, and if they hadn't had the article ripped out of them. And I read that, in dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you put them on a typical American diet or made them smoke or didn't let them exercise or made them socially stressed and isolated. And you could reverse it if you change those things. So it's like, why should humans be any different? I was a second-year medical student at the time. They just said, well, it is, it's impossible. So one of the nice things about being a student is you're not really fully indoctrinated. So I somehow managed to make it through that 3-month rotation with Dr. DeBakey, who, by the way, called me about 4 years ago out of the blue. And I recognized his voice, after all these decades. It was like, "Hey, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey." And I said, "To what do I owe this on?" He had a very distinctive Louisiana accent that I immediately had a pit in my stomach, just from the trauma that I'd experienced before being on the service. I said, "To what do I owe this honor?" He goes, "Well, those weird ideas I used to give you such a hard time about when you were my medical student?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember it really well." He goes, "That's what's kept me alive all these years." He goes, "I'm 99 years old. I'll probably be dead soon. I just thought you'd like to know my wife got interested in your work and it really helped me," and then hung up. So if you live long enough, things kind of come full circle. But anyway, I decided, growing up and going to medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Texas, Texas has this pioneering ethos. You've got this weird idea, you're a medical student, doesn't matter, we'll support it. Go for it. You'll learn something, even if it doesn't work. So the chief of medicine, Tony Gatto, said he'd support it. And the chief of cardiology, Richard Miller, said he would donate the lab tests. And so I went to every hotel in Houston, and the last one gave me 10 rooms for a month. And so I put 10 men and women who had bad heart disease in the hotel for a month and did everything myself except cook the meals. And after a month, we used thallium, which is a new test at the time to measure blood flow to the heart. And 8 of the 10 patients showed improvement in their blood flow, and their chest pain went away. And these were really sick people. These were people who were considered, they had such diffuse disease, they were considered inoperable. And back then, that was the days of DeBakey and Cooley. Almost everybody was operable. And so I said, look, what we found. And everybody go, well, that's impossible. Heart disease, the best you can do is slow it down. They can't have gotten better. And certainly not in just a month. And I said, well, you did the studies, you did the tests. Why? Well, these tests must be wrong. I said, well, what do you mean they're wrong? These are the same tests we send people to surgery every day with. So it was my first indication that when you're doing something that doesn't fit the conventional wisdom, it's often met with skepticism and sometimes even hostility. And they said, well, you didn't have a randomized control group. How do you know they wouldn't have gotten better anyway? And I said, well, technically that's true, but how often do you see patients get better anyway like this? Not just that their angina goes away, but that their perfusion improves. He goes, that's beside the point. So I went back to school, finished my MD, then took another year off. This time we did have a randomized control group, and we replicated those findings, published them in JAMA. I ended up going to Boston, did my fellowship at Harvard and my medical residency at Mass General, moved to San Francisco in 1984 and began the most definitive study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, which used, ironically, these very high-tech, state-of-the-art scientific measures like quantitative arteriography and cardiac PET scans to measure stenosis and perfusion. For the effects of this very low cost and low tech intervention. And we found that after a year, there was overall reversal in terms of the arteries became less clogged. These were all independently assessed by independent observers, whereas they got more clogged after a year in the usual care group. And they were following the traditional guidelines at the time, the American Heart Association, less red meat, more fish and chicken, and take the skin off the chicken sort of things. And then based on those findings, we got NIH support to extend the study for 5 years, so a total of 5. So we found even more regression, more improvement in the amount of coronary artery stenosis or blockage after 5 years and after 1 year. So they got better and better in the intervention group. And the control group showed even more clogging of their arteries, more progression of disease after 5 years and after 1 year. So they got worse and worse. And we published the 1 year findings in the Lancet and the 5 year findings in the Journal of the AMA, and the 5 year PET findings also in the Journal of the AMA as a separate paper. So that really got me interested in the whole field of lifestyle medicine. And then later did studies showing that these same lifestyle interventions could not only help prevent, but often stop or even reverse the progression of so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases: hypertension, high cholesterol, obesity, prostate cancer, changed gene expression with Craig Venter, lengthened telomeres with Liz Blackburn, and most recently, the improvement in Alzheimer's disease in many patients. So the question then becomes, why is it that these same lifestyle changes can affect so many different diseases? I mean, we were all trained that, different diseases, different diagnoses, different treatments, and yet these same lifestyle changes impacted all these different conditions. And the answer is that, and I wrote about this in a book that I co-authored with my wife, Anne, called Undo It, which basically put forth this unifying theory that the reason why these same lifestyle changes affect so many different diseases is that they're not really so different. They all share so many of the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, in telomeres, in gene expression, in angiogenesis, apoptosis, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, immune function, and so on. And these mechanisms, in turn, are directly turned on or turned off by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and social support we have, or to reduce it to its essence, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. And the more diseases we looked at, the more scientific evidence we had to show that. And so that radically simplifies what we tell our patients. It's not like, here's your heart disease diet and lifestyle program, and here's the one for Alzheimer's, and here's the one for prostate cancer, and so on. It's why what's good for your heart is good for your brain, because they share so many of the same biological mechanisms.
Thank you for sharing this background. I've seen these themes of, number one, maybe I'll start with curiosity. And I love that you highlighted that back being a medical student, in some ways, we're there to learn. Every student is there to learn. So you're allowed to understand mistakes, make mistakes, but also challenge the status quo. So As you were starting that early work and then going into afterwards when you finished your medical school and started practicing and doing more trials, getting NIH funding, in that critique that you received earlier, where do you think was the fairest critique? What have you learned from it? And what did you change moving forward to respond to that?
Well, I think I addressed that. They would say, well, you didn't have a randomized control group. So we did randomized control studies. The last two studies that we just talked about did have randomized control groups. That I think those were legitimate criticisms. Another criticism is that, well, you had a small sample size, so it's not really definitive. But many people don't realize the whole point of a randomized control trial or experimental design in general is to answer really a simple question. Is this a real finding or is this due to chance? And by convention, if it's less than a 5% likelihood that it's due to chance, then it's considered a real finding or statistically significant. So how do you do that? Well, either you get consistent big changes in smaller groups of people, or you don't have to have such big changes in larger groups of people. Now, we did the former. Now, by analogy, it's like if you were studying the effects of penicillin on pneumococcal pneumonia in the 1950s before there was drug resistance, and if you had 50 patients and half of them you put on penicillin and half of them you didn't, you don't need 1,000 patients to see that it's working because the differences between the groups are anybody can see. So that's kind of the approach that I've taken, which is the traditional the experimental design is you have one independent variable, one dependent variable, you keep everything else constant. But the problem is that when you're doing a behavioral intervention, you're never just changing one thing. You may think you are, but you're not. I mean, let's just say you're looking at the effects of exercise on whatever, but you're not just exercising. You're giving people a sense of empowerment. You're often exercising with other people, so you have the support group effect. When you exercise, it's harder to smoke, so maybe people smoke less because they're now exercising. And so there are a lot of things that we may not notice, but we're never just changing one thing. So my approach is to say, let's change a lot of things at the same time, because you get a synergy from changing a lot of things. 1 + 1 = 4, not just 2. And so that's the reason we were able to show that we could reverse so many of these different diseases for the first time, is that it's hard. You have to make really big changes. And so that's what we've done. Now we can't parse out the relative contribution, how much is due to diet versus exercise versus meditation versus social support. But I'm less concerned about that question because these are all things that we know are good for you anyway, and the only side effects are good ones. So, and they all don't really cost anything. It's a third world diet. It's less expensive to eat this way. Walking doesn't cost anything. Meditating doesn't cost anything. Loving doesn't cost anything, unlike most things we do as doctors. And also, I think the relative contribution, you can look at as a group, but for any individual, it may vary. For some person who's really stressed out, then that may be more important than someone else. So what we found was that even though the number of patients was relatively small, like 48 patients in the lifestyle heart trial, the fact that we showed, you could argue and turn it on its head and say, look, if you can show statistically significant differences in a smaller group of people, like the analogy with penicillin and pneumococcal pneumonia, it means your intervention must be pretty potent to be able to get a signal that's strong enough that you can show it in a smaller group of people. Now, it makes it less generalizable, which is a separate issue. If you have a smaller group of people, generally it's less diverse, it's less representative of the general population. But in terms of efficacy, which is what we're really talking about here, if you can show statistically significant improvements in a smaller group of people, then it's a real finding. And that's also important because it's very hard to get funding to do something that's thought impossible. It's a bit of a catch-22. Even more recently, when I first went to the NIH and National Institute on Aging and said, let's do the study, see if we can reverse the progression of dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And they said, and we were working with the top collaborators in the country, people like Rudy Tanzi and Stephen Arnold and Doreen Rentz at Harvard and Mass General, and Mia Kifa-Pelto at the Carroll Institute and Doug Glasgow at UC San Diego and so on. Liz Blackburn to measure telomeres. They said, like, everybody knows it can't be done. Why should we waste our money? And without the funding, you can't see if it works. And I don't think it works. Why should we waste our money? It's what sometimes people refer to as NIH kind of funds layups. Things like, is it 500 milligrams or 250 milligrams? They're not really transformational questions. And so we had to go and raise the money as we went along, which is a crazy way to do research because you never know if you're going to have to shut the study down. Normally you get a grant. If you get enough grant money, then you start to do your program. So we didn't have that luxury. So we had to work with smaller groups of people because we didn't, have the luxury of getting a huge grant to be able to do it with larger groups of people. But still, we published in all the first-line medical journals, Lancet, and which is now considered the #1 journal in the world, JAMA, Circulation, American Journal of Cardiology, PNAS, New England Journal, and so on. So, and then ultimately, Medicare agreed to cover my program for heart disease because of the data. So now we have data on, tens of thousands of people. It's not randomized control trial anymore, but you could argue that once you've proven something works, it's not even ethical to have randomized control groups that are non-intervention. So that's the criticism that we most often get, but it really comes from people who don't fully understand experimental design.
I think also there's this vicious cycle that lifestyle interventions get this stigma of, well, this is soft science. And even when you try to quantify it, when you look into the intervention, I appreciate you saying we're not going to isolate these things from each other necessarily, because you often, when you're publishing your research, you publish it as lifestyle, not exercise alone or nutrition alone, or in many cases. And that's also the opportunity that in real life, that's how it happens. You're not putting a person in a room and only on that diet for the rest of their lives and in that measurements. So you're trying to bring that pragmatism into these trials and moving from efficacy, the ideal setting, towards pragmatism and pragmatic trials, which is real life. Where are you seeing the change over these years that you've been dealing with the challenges with conducting this research? What steps forward has been made?
Well, I mean, I'm known as the father of lifestyle medicine, that we've created a whole new field of medicine. It has board certification now, it has tens of thousands of members worldwide, because we've, done the fundamental research showing that it can help prevent or even reverse the progression of so many different diseases. So I think that's the most exciting trend in medicine today that's now become mainstream. It's in, 63 different countries and so on. And I think that part of the problem is that there's something called a type 2 error, which is that there's something going on, but you can't detect it. And I think that's nowhere is that easier to see than in Alzheimer's research. So the amyloid hypothesis has dominated Alzheimer's research for decades, and only 3 drugs have been approved in the last 20 years: aducanumab, lecanemab, and donanemab. And one of them got taken off the market, so there are really only two drugs now. And they just slow down the rate at which you get worse. They spend billions of dollars developing these drugs. They're monoclonal antibodies that essentially move amyloid out of your brain. And the rationale was, well, if amyloid's, this kind of protein that gunks up and short circuits your brain, if you can move it out of your brain, then the cognition should get better. But in all 3 drug trials, and again, these are the only 3 drugs that have been approved in 20 years, just slow down the rate at which you get worse, and not even by that much, and mostly in men, even though twice as many women get it. And the side effects can be considerable, like 18 to 20% of people get what's called ARIA, bleeding into your brain, or swelling of your brain, and they're expensive. They start at $30,000 a patient, but by the time you pay the PET scans and infusion costs and so on, it's more like $80,000 or $90,000 a person. So why is that? Well, because the amyloid is just one of many mechanisms that causes Alzheimer's dementia. And so if all you're doing is that one thing, then you're going to slow it down a little bit, but not even by that much. But lifestyle changes, we found, we did a randomized controlled trial in collaboration with all the people I mentioned earlier. And we found for the first time that using 4 standard measures of cognition and function that are used in FDA drug trials, that 3 of the 4, we showed statistically significant differences compared to the randomized control group that got worse in all 4 measures. My favorite is called the Clinical Global Impression of Change, and I like that particular measure because they not only interview the patient, but also their spouse or caregiver, and they really know what's going on with the patient because they're with them all the time. And we found that basically 73% of the patients stopped or improved their cognition in just 20 weeks, whereas in the usual care control group, none of them got better. A third stayed about the same, and 2/3 got worse. Now, why is it that the lifestyle changes not only work as well as drugs, but in this case, even better? And we also found a dose-response correlation between the degree of lifestyle change using a formula a priori that we use in all of our studies. And the more you change, the better you get, which adds another level of biological plausibility. But we measured the amyloid in these patients, what's called the A beta 42/40 ratio. It's the same test they used in the drug trials. In fact, that was their major endpoint measure. And we found that the lifestyle changes, like the drugs, also changed the A beta 42/40 ratio. In other words, they were moving amyloid out of the brain, but they're also changing these other biological mechanisms besides that, like the ones we talked about earlier. Chronic inflammation measures got way better in the intervention group. Oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, the difference in predominance of organisms. The good organisms that are associated with improvement in Alzheimer's went up, and the bad ones went down, that Rob Knight did, who's considered the leading microbiome expert in the world. So the bottom line is that the drugs move amyloid out of the brain, but that's all they do. You get a little bit of benefit. The lifestyle changes also move amyloid out of the brain, but they also work on all these other biological mechanisms. Again, what's good for your heart is good for your brain, because they share these same mechanisms. And so even though we weren't using drugs, we actually got better outcomes because a number of the patients could actually show improvement in cognition. And it wasn't even, it wasn't just a little bit. I mean, yes, these were statistically significant, but the question is like, what does that really mean clinically? Is it clinically significant? And, a number of patients, not everybody got better, of course, as I mentioned, but many patients did. And, they'd say things like, I used to love reading books, but I had to give up reading because I'd read a paragraph and I'd kind of forget what I read and I have to read it over and over again. I finally said, to hell with it. It's not worth it. I'll just stop reading. Or I used to love watching a movie, but I couldn't follow the plot, or I couldn't do my checkbook, or I couldn't cook because I'd leave the gas on or whatever. And now that one guy loved to play the bagpipes, he said I had to give them up because I couldn't remember the notes. And now I'm playing the bagpipes again. And I have a bagpipe student, you can't make this stuff up. So it's incredibly gratifying. In some ways, the most gratifying work we've done, because at least with other conditions like heart disease, there are other interventions that at least have some benefit, but nothing really works in terms of stopping or reversing Alzheimer's, but lifestyle does. And again, the only side effects are good ones at a fraction of the cost. We've followed these patients for another 20 weeks, which I presented at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Toronto in July. And I can't really talk about the specific findings because they're under editorial review now. But in general, we found even more improvement after 40 weeks than after 20 weeks. And the control group, which got worse overall, we then crossed them over and they showed the same kind of improvements at the intervention group. So all these things add to and the thing that really caused me to fall off my chair when we looked at the data. And remember, these A beta 42/40 ratios were done at Harvard. I had nothing to do with them. We found that there was a dose response correlation, not only between the degree of lifestyle change and the degree of change in improvement in cognition, but also a dose response correlation between the degree of lifestyle change and the degree of change in the A beta 42/40 ratio. So that again adds to the biological plausibility, even though the number of patients is lower. Now, Emblem Health, which is based in New York, announced last month that they're going to cover our program for Alzheimer's for the first 150 patients that they send to us, we're going to collect data on. So that'll give us it won't be a randomized trial, but we've already shown the efficacy, but it'll allow us to have a larger group of people in terms of generalizability. And in 2010, Medicare agreed to create a new benefit category to cover my program for heart disease, which and during COVID, they began covering when we offered virtually. So now we can do it all by Zoom, and we can reach people in their own homes. They don't have to get off from work or get childcare or transportation, or a lot of people don't want to go to a hospital, or they have to live within driving distance of a hospital that we've trained. Now they can live anywhere and have access to it.
Yeah, this is fantastic, Dr. Ornish, and I love how I could spend an hour talking with you about your Alzheimer's research, being a brain guy. And I sense you mentioned earlier, like what I call the shiny object bias exists in industry, right? There are these 5-figure drugs out there by industry and other folks, right? But then there's this low-hanging fruit that is powerful, right? That it's hard to tell the public and even reviewers out there that, should be funded. So I love what you're doing, and I just wonder if you have some comments on how the Alzheimer's randomized trial was challenged by that phenomenon.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have this bias, that not only in medicine but in the general public, that it has to be something new and shiny, as you say, high tech, expensive, uh, to be powerful. And the idea that lifestyle changes, that's kind of boring, yeah. diet and exercise, yeah, sure. Like what could that do? How powerful could that be? Well, pretty darn powerful, as it turns out. And I think our unique contribution has been using these very high tech, state of the art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very low tech and low costs and in some ways ancient interventions can be. And so that's been part of the problem, is that we don't have pharma companies that are paying lots of money to get these studies done. And but to me, the reason that I spend so much of my time doing these studies is that properly done and working with the best collaborators and published in the leading peer-reviewed journals, we can often redefine what's possible. And by doing so, we can give, at this point, millions of people new hope and new choices they didn't have before. I mean, CMS is projected to spend $3.5 billion on this one Alzheimer's drug, lecanemab, this year, which, as I said, doesn't do a whole lot. We're hoping that eventually they'll cover our program for Alzheimer's the way they're covering it for heart disease, since it's the same program. It just would be broadening the inclusion criteria. It works better at a much lower cost, and as I said, the only side effects are good ones. So it's been a very slow process. I've been doing this work for 47 years, but at the same time, as I mentioned, I almost committed suicide when I was 19. That's how I got interested in all this. And so death has always been sort of close to me and always kind of a friend in a way. It's kind of like, I often think like, okay, well, this is going to be really hard. Everybody thinks it can't be done, but that's part of the adventure. What could be, I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's like, once you've decided you're not going to kill yourself, it's like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, maybe I won't get enough money to do the study, or maybe it won't show. If we show that it doesn't work, that'll be an important finding too. It'll be disappointing, but it'll be important because people need to know they don't want to fool themselves. If it doesn't work, we should find that to be true as well. But I always look about, like, if I'm 120 years old and looking back on my life and say, like, did I make a difference, coming this way? And what lessons did I learn? And for me, being able to work with people who have their hope taken away, and because that's what usually happens when someone's diagnosed with Alzheimer's, as you know, they usually are told something like, "I'm sorry, Mr. Jones or Ms. Smith, you've got Alzheimer's. There's not much we can do except maybe slow it down a little bit. If there's anything you want to do it soon because you don't have much time. Get your affairs in order." And it's devastating because when you lose your memories, you lose everything. My mom died of Alzheimer's. She was a true genius, and just watching her beautiful mind decay was heartbreaking. It almost becomes self-fulfilling when you take someone's hope away and you say, you're only going to get worse. It's like the brain starts to shut down, almost like an adaptive response. And then your world starts to shrink. It's like, don't wander off, just stay home. And we have to take away your car keys. And everything just begins to shrink. So to be able to not give people false hope, but real hope without any guarantees, there are no promises, but there's a good chance that if you really make these changes, there's a good chance they may help you. And that can really give many people new hope and new choices in the area that matters most that nothing else works in. So I thought, watching somebody say things like, I'm coming back, I can, to my old self, I have a sense that my sense of self-worth and my sense of who I am, an older but better version of me, or the language that they use. I don't know about you, but being able to kind of shine a light in that darkness and give people hope that, or in the case of reversing heart disease or whatever it happens to be, or prostate cancer or type 2 diabetes, or people are told, these are medications and how long do I have to take these, doctors? Like forever. It's like, I used to show a cartoon of doctors busily mopping up a floor around a sink they're overflowing. And how long do I have to mop up the floor? Well, forever. Like, why don't we turn off the faucet? It's like, what we find is if we can motivate people and give them the support they need to change lifestyle to this degree, that the need for many people under their doctor's supervision can reduce, or in some cases get off of medications they were told they need to take the rest of their life, which makes them feel like they're getting better and they're empowered, and not just that, they're on a downward slope. So for me, I learned I could take all the meaning out of my life when I was 19. That's why I was almost committed suicide. Who cares? So what? Nothing matters. Big deal. But I learned that I could imbue my life with meaning by doing acts of service. So the most selfish thing I can do is to help other people because it brings me a sense of meaning. And to be able to do the research studies and to redefine what's possible and empower people in that way really gives me a great sense of meaning and joy, even though, and it's what makes it's hard, but sometimes the things that are hard are the most meaningful. It's why giving birth is really hard, but you really appreciate your baby, if you're a woman, once you've gone through that. It's so the idea that something is hard to me is my spiritual teacher used to say, it's kind of like when you first learn how to surf, even a little wave can knock you over. But once you get good at it, you start looking for the big waves. You'll go halfway around the world to surf in Bali or in Kauai or wherever, because it's, these 40-foot waves. It's kind of exhilarating. It's really, sometimes you wipe out, but it's a great ride. Another way to look at it is like being on a pilgrimage. When you're on a true pilgrimage, as my spiritual teacher, a man named Swami Satchidananda, used to tell me, you don't even tell people you're on a pilgrimage. You just go, and you're going to go to wherever it is, and you don't even ask for food. People have to notice that you're hungry and offer you food. There's just an act of faith in all of this. And I know this sounds kind of crazy, but I've learned that if the commitment is there and you're doing good work, that somehow the universe, provides what you need at the right time. I can't tell you how many times we thought we were going to run out of money, most even recently on this Alzheimer's study. And I've been doing these studies a long time and have a good reputation, but still, it's very hard to get people to give you money to do something that they think's not going to work. And yet it's that commitment that I think ultimately bends the universe in ways that make the impossible possible.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I honor your experience. I appreciate you sharing this part of your life. If a human is determined to achieve something, often we say nothing is going to stop them. If a human is propelled by science, humanity, and personal experience, then it is a force to be reckoned with, and you are that force. So I appreciate you sharing that, and you've always been a source of inspiration. You talked about these challenges with lifestyle medicine and the conversations having them, be it with other physicians, scientists, as well as just approaching that through the public health eye. With your experience, as some people often criticize lifestyle medicine as being too idealistic or hard to scale, how do you respond with the continuous evolution that is? And you mentioned the field being you being the father of lifestyle medicine, and I'm a proud member of that movement. How do you see the path forward in responding to these challenges?
Well, we are scaling it. We have tens of thousands of patients who've done it. Medicare is covering my program. They've been doing it since 2010 and virtually in the last 6 years, and they're paying for 72 hours of training. So we divide that into 18 4-hour sessions. So if you can imagine a Zoom screen with 15 people on it, plus an instructor. So it's an hour of supervised exercise like you'd find in a regular cardiac rehab program, but then an hour of yoga and meditation. I mean, who would have thought Medicare would be paying for that? An hour with a meditation teacher. The first class would have an exercise physiologist. The third class would be a support group with a psychologist. And it's not a support group like helping people stay on the diet support group. It's a support group that's a powerful intervention in its own right. I wrote a book about this back in 1998 called Love and Survival that were then hundreds of studies, but now literally tens of thousands of studies have shown that people who are lonely and depressed and isolated are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. In part because you're more likely to abuse yourself when you're feeling lonely and isolated. They'll say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes and they're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or they use food to fill the void, or alcohol to numb the pain, or fentanyl to numb the pain, or video games to distract themselves from pain, or working all the time we've all done to distract ourselves. And so to me, the pain is not the problem, it's the messenger. It's saying, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. So we can help people use the experience of suffering as a doorway for really transforming their lives. And so the support group that we're able to create, even virtually, if anything good came out of COVID, I didn't think this would work as well virtually, but worked just as well, is to create a safe environment where people are encouraged to talk about what's really going on in their lives, without feeling like they're going to get criticized or judged or told what to do. And so, there's been a radical shift in our culture in the last 50 years with the breakdown of the social networks that used to give people that sense of love and connection and community. I mean, when I grew up, I'm not that old, we had a sense of a neighborhood, where we were 2 or 3 generations of people who grew up together. You could go next door or hang out or play football or whatever with your neighbors. Or our parents had a job that felt secure that they'd been at for years, or a church or mosque or synagogue or club that they would go to regularly, or an extended family they saw regularly. And many people today don't have any of those things. And what you really miss with like social media is that when you grow up in a neighborhood, they really know you. They don't just know your Facebook profile or your bio sketch. They know where you messed up, and where you got busted or were suicidal or whatever it happens to be. And you know that they know, and they know that you know that they know. And there's just something really primal about, like, I see you, like an avatar, which is really from an African proverb. I see all of you, where you are doing well and where you're not doing well, and I'm still there for you. And there's just something really primal to have that sense of being connected in an authentic way, as opposed to on social media where it looks like everybody's just presenting their best self and it looks like everybody's got this perfect life but you. And that's why the studies have shown that the more social media that you're on, the more depressed you are, because again, it's not an authentic intimacy. It looks like everybody's doing well but you. So in our support groups, we recreate that authentic intimacy. We create a sense of safety, because intimacy to me is really healing, and you can only be intimate and open your heart to the degree that you feel safe, because otherwise somebody might hurt you. And so we create a safe environment where people are encouraged to talk about what's really going on in their lives without fear that someone's going to hurt them or give them glib advice or whatever. And it's the part of the program people often have the most skepticism about, like, okay, eat well, I get that, and move more, okay, and stress less, well, okay, that's a little weird, but okay, I'll do that. And what is this love more stuff, And it's like, oh, okay. And then once they start to be in the groups, even after the first hour, sometimes people are opening up and sharing at such a deep level because it's such a powerful need that is so often unfulfilled. And it's the part of the program that invariably people are the most find the most meaningful because we're not getting it in other places. And it's a powerful intervention in its own right. And it's one of the reasons why 93% of the sessions of the 72 hours get completed, because it's so meaningful. And the other thing we've learned is that when you really make big changes, you get big benefits. There's this dose response correlation. And so sometimes it's actually easier to get people to make big changes than small ones because their angina, for example, goes away in 2 or 3 weeks. And so it's not like preventing something bad from happening years down the road to make these lifestyle changes that you don't want to think about, like having another heart attack. It's like, oh, my angina is gone after a few weeks. Wow, I can make love with my spouse. I can play with my kids. I can go back to work. I can, walk across the street without getting angina. Yeah, I like eating junk food, but not that much, because what I gain is so much more than what I give up. That's part of what makes it sustainable. So Medicare pays we do that twice a week for 4 hours. And the fourth hour is, so the first hour is exercise and stress management, which is really meditation and yoga, the support group, and then the last hour is a lecture usually from a registered dietitian. Twice a week, 4 hours at a time for 9 weeks. Medicare pays 80% of that. And most people have supplemental insurance that pays the rest of it. We're just now starting to do that for Alzheimer's. We hope that now that Emblem Health is covering it, we hope that that ultimately Medicare will do the same. Because again, for me, it's all about having seen what a powerful difference these changes can make. I didn't want this to be concierge medicine. I spent 16 years working with CMS to get Medicare to cover this, because I knew if you change reimbursement, then we can make it available to the people who most need it. And ultimately, if you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education.
That's an important point, because one of the biggest challenges with lifestyle modalities, be it this program, health and wellness coaching, nutrition, other modalities, is the scalability and the reimbursement. So,
well, you can, it's all in my books, like the Undo It book. You can get for, $11 on Amazon. It's all there, but it's hard to make changes on your own. And yet we've done studies with Mutual of Omaha, where they found they saved almost $30,000 a patient when people went through this program. Or Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield cut their costs in half in the first year. So it is medically effective and cost effective, but many people do need the support, which now that we have the coverage is now much more widely available to the people who can most benefit from it. So it's no longer a question of, is it scalable? I didn't know. Could we get people to do this or not, in bricks and mortar sites? And we did. Can we get people to do it virtually? And we did. Can it change all these different disease states? And it does, so those unanswered questions we've now answered. And now the question is, can we get medical education to change enough so that, I'm on the nutrition working group at the American College of Cardiology. We published a paper a few years ago. The average doctor gets, 4 hours of nutrition training a year. And the average cardiology fellow in 4 years of fellowship get none, so if we change reimbursement, hopefully we can change both medical practice and medical education. I think there's a convergence of forces that finally, after all these years, makes this the right idea at the right time, because the limitations of drugs and surgery, like in Alzheimer's, are becoming more clear. The power of lifestyle interventions are becoming more well documented, and the reimbursement is now there, along with the cost savings.
I do want to also highlight that the adherence, and you talked about scalability, and maybe my question was, or even a statement, scalability is also situational for certain patients and their loved ones. And I'm someone who does research about burden of healthcare, be it the good or not so good. There is a challenge of adding more burden on people because people don't have all the time. So I'm wondering, where do you see a potential of how this intensive lifestyle intervention can be scaled to patients in different doses, and where is the direction afterwards?
Well, my last two books, the Undo It book is really based on reversing diseases. The book I wrote before that is called The Spectrum, and it's about preventing diseases. Now, if you're trying to reverse disease, it's hard. That's why we were the first to prove that, because most people didn't go far enough. And most people didn't think that people would make changes to that degree, but we showed that most people do. But the Spectrum book is based on the idea that if you're just trying to, get your LDL down or your A1C down or your blood pressure down or your weight down, it's not all or nothing. The more you change, the more you improve. So part of what we've learned is that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. And as soon as I tell somebody, eat this and don't eat that, and do this and don't do that, not only is it not helpful, it's usually counterproductive. It's like, it's like, especially if a spouse says, "Oh, honey, you're not supposed to be eating that." It's like, how would you like a nice Hawaiian punch? Uh, and that goes back to the first dietary intervention. When I lecture, sometimes I'll say, like, when Adam and Eve were told, "Don't eat the apple," and that didn't go so well, and that was God talking. So I've just learned that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. So rather than saying, here's a diet to go on, because diets are all about what you can have and what you must do, eat this, don't eat that, and it's counterproductive to say, look, in the Spectrum book, and once you call foods good or bad, it's a very small step to saying I'm a bad person because I eat bad food. And then once you eat bad food, it's like, might as well finish the pint of ice cream because you're a bad person. And so instead of saying call food good or bad, I just categorize food. Some foods are not good or bad, but some are healthier than others. And so I call group one the healthiest foods, the usual suspects, basically fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and things like that. Group five are the least helpful, and again, the usual suspects, processed, salami and junk foods of that sort. And groups 2 through 4 in the middle, and say, okay, what are your goals? And let's say you came to me and say, why are you here? Well, I want to live longer. Really? Well, why do you want to live longer? Well, no one's ever asked me that before. Doesn't everyone want to live longer? I said, well, no, actually, I almost killed myself when I was 19. A lot of people just trying to get through the day. They use these behaviors that we talked about earlier to just cope with their pain, their loneliness, their isolation, their depression. Okay, well, I want to live longer. I don't know. I want to watch my kids grow up. I want to dance at their wedding. I want to write a book or whatever. Viktor Frankl wrote about this when he interviewed concentration camp survivors in World War II. It's like the ones who survived weren't the strongest or healthiest. They're the ones who had the strongest sense of meaning and purpose. Like, I have to survive so that I can whatever, be reunited with my loved ones or bear witness or whatever it was. So if you can just get people in touch with why they want to, what is that brings them a sense of meaning and purpose, that's the first step. Then it's like, okay, why are you here? Well, I want to get my LDL down 50 points, or I want to get my A1C down a couple points, or I want to get my blood pressure down 10 points. Great. What are you doing now? What are you eating? Well, I'm eating mostly groups 4 and 5 unhealthy foods. Okay. How much are you willing to change? How much am I willing to change? No one's ever asked me that before. They're always telling me what to do. Oh, I don't. That's great. I don't know. I'll eat less of the 4 and 5 and more of the groups 1 through 3, but I'll still eat some junk food too. Okay, great. How much exercise are you getting? Not that much. Well, how much are you willing to do? Oh, wow. You're not telling me how much I have to do? Okay, I don't know. I'll walk 20 or 30 minutes a day. Great. How much meditation and yoga are you doing? 0. How much are you willing to do? I don't know. I'll meditate 10 minutes a day. Great. How much time are you spending with your friends and family and loved ones? Not enough. I'll spend more. Great. Okay. So we support that. But if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you're bad or you failed. Just eat healthier the next. You don't have time to exercise one day, do a little more the next. You don't have time to meditate for an hour, do it for a minute. Whatever you do, there's a corresponding benefit. So you decide, you're in control. So you can't fail. There's no diet to get on. There's no diet to get off. So it's a much more compassionate way, and it's ultimately much more sustainable. So let's say a month later they come back and they wanted to get their LDL down 50 points, and now it's down 30 points. You say, how wonderful. It's good. Look how much, look what you've done. Now, if you just eat a little more on the healthier end of the spectrum and do a little more exercise, meditation, social support, that'll probably do it. So I just find that, again, if you're trying to reverse disease, I don't tell people even then what they have to do, but I say, look, this is what it generally takes to do it. But if you're just trying to stay healthy or do secondary prevention, then it's not all or nothing.
Thank you for integrating coaching into the conversation. As a coach, I appreciate always these elements being brought, and that is really what medicine is about. In addition to treating and managing, it's healing, and it's healing a human being. So it's talking to the person, not talking to the condition or the disease and symptom. So thank you for sharing that.
I can take that even a little bit deeper, which is meditation, for example, which we always try to work within someone's own belief system. So they can do a secular version or they can do a religious version. It's, it can be Om or Shalom or Salam or Amen or Amin or the word one if you want to do something secular. There are words that start with an O or an A, they end with an M or an N, kind of cross-culturally. But the ancient swamis and rabbis and priests and monks and nuns and all these people who did meditation, they weren't managing stress. They were or lowering their blood pressure, or unclogging their arteries, or getting their A1C down. They're powerful tools they're more than that. They do all these things, but they're more than that. They're tools for transformation. They quiet down our mind and body enough to experience a more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being. And what we've learned, and this is what I learned from my teacher, is that they don't bring you a sense of peace or well-being. It's already there. What they do is they temporarily help us to keep it from disturbing it. And that's a very different culture than the way most of us are raised. The whole advertising industry is based on telling you it is out there. If you just get more of whatever they're selling, more money, more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever. Once you set up that view of the world, then you're going to feel really bad because until you get it, you're stressed. The question shifts from how can I get what I think I need to be happy and healthy to how can I stop disturbing my own inner health and well-being that's already there. And that's very empowering because if it's out there, then everybody who has something I think I need has power over me. If the question is, what am I doing to disturb my own inner peace and health that's already there? Not to blame myself, that empowers me because I can do something about that. And so when we teach people to meditate, it's not just in the standpoint of managing stress better. It does that, but it can give people to remind themselves when they're feeling more peaceful after they're meditating or doing yoga or whatever, that didn't bring you that sense of peace and well-being. It was already there. And then you can say, okay, what am I doing that's disturbing that, and work at that level. My spiritual teacher used to like to make puns. People say, what are you, a Hindu? He'd say, no, I'm an undu, which is where the title of my book came from. Undo these things so we can experience what we already have. And if you take it even deeper, it can give you a non-dual experience that on one level, we're separate. You're you and I'm me. On another level, we're already connected, and since intimacy is healing, getting that direct experience of the interconnectedness again, that it's not that we have to be interconnected, we already are, but having the awareness of that can be profoundly healing as well. Intimacy is healing, whether it's on in a support group, we become more connected with each other. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. Yoga is from the Sanskrit, to yoke, to unite, union. These are really old ideas. But if we can have that double vision, that on one level we're separate, but on another level we're not, it's like the analogy of a old style movie projector with a light going through the film and then projecting all these names and forms and drama on the screen. But if you get lost in that, you can get really stressed watching a movie, But if you remind yourself, oh, it's just a movie, it's the same light that's manifesting in all these different characters and dramas and situations, then you can really play with it and enjoy it a lot more fully. And so ultimately, where I'm taking this is that as physicians, if all we are is a collection of algorithms, we're going to get replaced by AI before long because AI does algorithms already. If you're looking at, biopsies, you can pattern recognition with AI better than a trained pathologist in many cases. But we are technicians, we're scientists, but we're also more than that. And if we can be healers for our patients, if we can help them use the sacred time when they're diagnosed with a condition, a life-threatening illness particularly, there can be an opportunity for real transformation because it really provides a perspective. There's an interest in doing things that they might not otherwise be interested in doing. It's one we don't usually take advantage of because we're, again, literally or figuratively bypassing the problem. But to me, the drugs and surgery can get people out of a life-threatening situation so that they can then begin saying, okay, how did you get here and what can you do to transform your life? And I can't tell you how many people in that context have said, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me. And the first time I heard that, I was like, what? Are you crazy? And they said, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin trying all these different things that I never would have done before. That my life, I'm, rediscovering inner sources of peace and joy and well-being. I feel better about myself. I love myself better. I'm more compassionate with other people because I can experience that sense of interconnectedness. My marriage and my kids and I are getting along better, so I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but having gone through this, for me, it was getting depressed and suicidal. For someone else, it might be having a heart attack or a diagnosis of prostate cancer or Alzheimer's, whatever. So we don't say how wonderful you have this diagnosis. That would be, nobody looks for suffering, but sometimes there it is. But if we can work with people when they have that in that sacred moment and, do all the things that we're trained to do, with their meds and surgery and all these other things, and bring this other dimension to that, then it's an incredibly gratifying way to practice medicine, and to be able to love your patients and have them love you, I think really facilitates healing in so many different ways.
That's
Awesome.
I know we have so many questions and so many other topics that we can get into, but I appreciate you bringing these elements that this is also a component. It's the individual responsibility, it's the system responsibility, it's the society and community responsibility, that these units all converge together to help us living better and do well. So I know that Dave is going to probably share with you, as we are concluding today,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, Dean, this was amazing. I learned so much. And we wanted to dovetail into these sort of 4 rapid fire kind of quick questions. So I'll start with the first one. Question 1 is one food that still bring you joy.
This is the lightning round. Chocolate for me, really good dark chocolate. And, my wife did a meditation on chocolate in the Spectrum book. There's a DVD that kind of dates it, but kind of comes along with that. If you really have something really high quality chocolate and you make that a meditation, you give it your full attention, even a small amount can be exquisitely gratifying.
Love that. Love that. Question number 2, your favorite non-clinical prescription.
Love.
Beautiful. That's powerful. Number 3, a scientific mentor who shaped you.
Alexander Leaf. He was the chief of medicine at Harvard and the chair of medicine at Harvard, and then became the first chair of preventive medicine at Harvard. And he was the chief of the medical services at the Mass General when I was training there. He was my mentor.
And then last, a book you'd recommend.
Undo It.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Ornish, thank you, the godfather of lifestyle medicine. Thank you for showing us how compassion, humanity, and science and evidence can all converge through practice, and how we care for individuals, we care for patients, we care for each other. We really appreciate you and appreciate all that you have shared with us today. And we would love to have you back more, because there's so much that we can talk about and discuss and learn from you. So thank you for your time.
Awareness is the first step in healing. And so your show is a healing force itself. So thank you for the chance to be part of it. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you. And for those who are listening or watching, explore Dr. Ornish's work and books, including Undo It and so many more, just beautiful work, and learn more about his work and his lifestyle medicine program. Go to www.ornish.com. That is spelled ORNISH.com. Till next time, inward with courage and outward with compassion.
If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, depression, or thoughts of suicide, please know that help is available. You are not alone, and reaching out for help is a sign of strength. In the U.S., you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7. If you're listening from outside the U.S., you can find international hotlines at findahelpline.com. Thank you for joining the Well-Being Manifesto podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment or review. To learn more about this discussion visit thewellbeingmanifesto.com. And remember, inward with courage, outward with compassion.